the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Today we continue to ask the question, what patterns is your business addicted to that are toxic? Let us help you with some business rehab. I'm Sakach here again with Tullio Siragusa and Ash Maher. Hey guys.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. Last episode in this series, we talked about the addiction to short-term profits. We talked about the ego-driven leadership, and we had a really fun segment on the dependence on consumer manipulation, marketing tactics, that kind of thing. So, Tullio, what toxic addiction do you want to focus on first today?
I want to talk about those snorting, being obsessed with hypergrowth, because that's what it's like. It's like snorting cocaine. It's like just expand, grow, and that drives burnout culture, sacrificing quality over speed and for speed, and very aggressive marketing tactics. I think we've talked about some of these in the past and some of our bad systems. That is like one. Unfortunately, I'm a little more familiar with this one than others because I was definitely one of those driven by hypergrowth, and it's awful. It's
yeah,
bad.
to me, this one really goes into the importance of kind of our bliss philosophy, because when you're growing super fast, like, this is when things get really stretched and you just leave things, at the roadside that might have been important to you and, really important to your culture, especially a lot of times. And so when you're really getting stretched here, this is when just all kinds of things happen. If you don't just, hey, let's take a pause here. Let's make sure we're on the right track. Tullio, what's the impact here?
Well, let's talk about the symptoms first. We did talk about the symptoms. The impact here is usually high employee turnover, brand dilution, poor customer experiences, and a very unsustainable business model. That's the impact. That's the bottom line of what it does.
A couple of those, like the poor customer experience, that's like what we're talking about, right? Where you're just suddenly, hey, how can we automate this? Or how can we just, that personal touch starts to get lost there in your business that you might have had previous to your hypergrowth, or you're putting in systems that are just trying to get you to from point A to point B, and you lose a lot in between. So I can feel that one for sure. Employee turnover, that's just a big one, right? Because the grind is just hitting
Turn
you.
them and burn them kind of a thing, Not good.
So what are the root causes here, Tullio, to this addiction?
People don't, it's just kind of like any other addiction in real life. It doesn't just happen to people who haven't gone through some form of trauma that they haven't healed, right? So the trauma, as I like to call it, is just the need to create value, right? And usually it's someone who's been judged heavily by, sales, growth that they can contribute. And so there's this market expectations that are being put on someone or putting them on themselves that then they spread to the entire organization. There's a lot of fear of missing out, FOMO that comes into this place. Like, if we don't capitalize on the opportunity now, this will never come back. We have a window of right now, there's that mindset. But mostly it's just internal pressure. It's like the need to be on top and compete and be the best at all costs. So it's usually driven by some insecurities, actually, quite frankly, because if you're kind of secure in yourself and your organization, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. So there's this desire to prove something. But also, if you're a public company and you're driven by shareholder value, there's that, there's the need to please the shareholders.
What did you mean? You mentioned the need to create value. Is that what you're talking about? The need for the shareholder value, or are you talking about someone within a position?
It's tied to what you're measuring. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, right? it's organizations that are driven by revenue targets. So whether it's the public markets that are expecting growth quarter over quarter, or a private equity that is expecting profitability, or a private investors who are giving money to a startup that are, again, wanting to see a return on the investment. So there's this need that you feel as a leader that you're being judged on creating the value, and the value has been decided that it's revenue and growth, and not just growth, but hyper growth. Like how fast and how rapidly can you grow, and what clip. So there's just this desire that's been thrown at you, and then you kind of judge whether you're an effective leader or not based on your ability to fulfill that desire.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, like you mentioned, it's just this one value is what kind of the problem is. You're focused on this single sort of monetary value with that hyper growth, whereas if you're also focused on, hey, this is, our higher purpose or something like that, along the way, you're going to make sure that you're also focused on, whether that's how you deal with your customers or things like that. You're going to make sure that those values are also being met, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, you just don't run over it with the hyper growth. So how do we rehab this, Tullio?
Well, again, it's a mindfulness thing, right? You got to advocate for mindful growth, quality over quantity, maintaining the core values of the business, and pacing the growth in alignment with reality, right? So it's based on market demand. You can't create what's not there. A lot of companies want to believe they can, right? We'll create market demand. That's a lot of the mindset too in this sort of addiction of hypergrowth. We'll create market demand. Well, sometimes you can if there's a need for something, but you can't artificially create demand. So, and also you can't artificially create capacity in the organization to fulfill that demand. So really the rehab is a dose of reality, first of all, just being honest and doing an assessment. It's kind of like, how we all have this need for self-awareness as individuals. The organization needs a little bit of self-awareness about where are we, where's the market, what can we fulfill, what is realistic that we can, in terms of our growth strategy. And then there has to be some educational and mind shift around this too, because it's not easy. Some people are really addicted to this. It's like they don't know how to operate at a pace that's normal. They just know how to do this, move, push. So there's some coaching that needs to take in place there. And it's like a recovery process to get it right.
Yeah, I think too, what's interesting about that is when you look at these sort of higher conscious businesses, let's take like Patagonia, for example. They aren't going to make decisions just based on that, that revenue growth scenario. They're sticking to what they value the most in these scenarios, which might be how do we source our cotton? How can we get it better sourced? Okay, that may cost us some money. Who cares? Because this is what we're about. It's these different types of questions. And a lot of times what happened with them is they'll pursue sort of that higher purpose. And even though at the face of it, it didn't look like it'd be profitable, but it actually turns out, oh, we actually got 25% growth just by focusing on the right thing, and not necessarily the cheapest thing or the quickest way to get from A to B. We just wanted to make sure we did it the right way, so that you got the whole ends justifying the means, or the means justifying the ends argument here with that.
Some of this also came from major collapses in history, where the demand just sort of died off. And then when demand picked up, it was this mindset, we learned something, we need to grow or we're going to die. So it's grow or die mindset. It's not this idea that you can create something sustainable for the long term. It's like, if we're not growing, we're dying, we're restricting. And I know a lot of businesses that have operated pretty much in a similar revenue level for decades, doing extraordinarily well, who don't have that mindset. And and they don't suffer from the ups and downs of the economy either, because they've created something a lot more sustainable. So some of this is just implanted in how marketing was introduced, 50, 60 years ago, and it's stuck. And so it's like a mind shift that needs to happen, which is difficult to do for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think you say grow or die too. It's like, well, how do you want to grow? So the recovery tactics we kind of have here are learning how to have controlled, sustainable growth, setting realistic expectations, and then really kind of integrating a mindfulness and a consciousness into your business practices, I think.
Bingo.
So, yep. Ash, what do you got for us as far as business addictions?
Well, this one has always grinded my gears and working with past organizations that are just stuck in their old ways. But this one's dependency on old systems and practices. Companies getting stuck in the past, cleaning out the outdated methods. The most painful is, hey, it's always been done this way. Well, why has it always been? Do you even know when it started? No, it's just always been done this way. That is, I think, an addiction that businesses need to break, and they are terrible.
This is a hard one. I mean, this is like, I'm sure everyone's gone through it in some way or another, but it's like people don't like change at all. And, especially like, it's like sometimes it's the old dogs, learning new tricks scenario too, where you're going to get just a lot of resistance on things. And it's sometimes hard to gracefully navigate all that with everyone. So what's the impact here? Ash?
So before we get into the impact, some of the symptoms of, it's reliant on old technologies. We talk about rigid processes, resistance to change. And like I said earlier, that, it's always been done. But the impact of all of this is it decreases competitiveness. There's an inability to adapt to market changes. So it makes your team less adaptable. And ultimately, it demotivates the workforce. And not only did I see this in previous organizations, I mean, I've experienced in college back in the fraternity days when I had to deal with people saying, it's always been this way. Well, then I'm now less motivated to even be a part of an organization that was meant to be fun, let alone a working organization, But yeah, those are some of the impacts. It kills motivation.
It's funny how some sayings become like self-fulfilling mantras. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah,
it's always been done this way. So like, what are some of the other root causes that actually make people feel like it's safe to just not innovate and stay, some people call it stay the same. I call it staying stuck.
It's comfort with the familiar, what they've already seen and they can predict, right? But also it's just a resistance to change of processes. The fact that there's a little bit of learning curve and a little bit of muscle challenges that you have to have, say when you work, you feel a little bit of tension when there's ever change of processes. There's always resistance to that. And then ultimately it's just fear of the unknown. It's like, hey, I've been able to predict what this is going to look like. I know we need to adapt, but I don't know what adapting is going to look like for us and what the result of that is going to be. So let me just cling on to what I'm familiar with and comfortable with. So I know how to predict what my next steps are. I think that's the big challenge. I will never forget when my first apprenticeship, and it was working with a family member of mine back in the day. And I'll never forget what he told me, and I'm glad it didn't stick with me. I was more aware, but at one point he had mentioned that, hey, he's like, Ash, if there's ever a time where if your arm breaks and you have to type this way, but it's getting results, don't change that. You just keep rocking and rolling. And at the time, being a young person, you can only imagine how that person was managing the organization, right? It was like no innovation, just keep going. And if you're guessing where that organization is now, not really around anymore, right? So these are kind of the broken practices that I find are the root cause. It's just a fear of the unknown. Familiarity.
Ash, you and I have talked about the fear of the unknown just quite a bit just in general. I mean, it's not just in business practice, but in personal life. I think people don't realize how much the fear of the unknown just kind of plays in their lives and holds them back from doing things that they might want to do. And it's always there. It's just very hard for people to embrace that things could be very different, could change. And, how do I handle that? It's a very, it's a very difficult problem for a lot of people to deal with in life. So absolutely, when it comes to business, it's one of those key things too. When someone's kind of stuck in their way, it's very hard to change them out of there. We do a lot of business changes in our culture, and I think it's actually sort of embracing the unknown is kind of really the key. And it's, it's an adventure and it's fun. And yeah, things might go a little sideways along the way, but it's actually kind of a fun process because you learn a lot while you're going through it.
It kind of makes me laugh a little bit. It makes me think of like people who play sports and like they'll wear the same dirty socks the whole season because they really believe that that's the thing that's helping them win. Yeah, of course it is, because anybody who goes next to you smells so bad with those dirty socks, they just run away. But it's like to actually think that that's actually doing something for you. It's like, come on, that has nothing to do with you winning, but you believe it does, so you stick with it. It's like, anyway.
And I think, yeah, you also have a problem too with like someone who comes to the business who's seen it done a different way.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you guys are doing it this way. And if they're not empowered enough to push, back a little bit, hey, how about this? How about this now? This is the way we've always done it. It's like, it's very frustrating, I think, just if you're not empowered, if you're not in a business situation where you can affect change.
Yeah. Conversely, I was part of an organization once. Our mantra and our way of being was that every time someone joins the organization changes. We introduce a change and we welcome that change. So every time someone comes in, there's an influence in a different direction. So some new ideas, and it was welcome and encouraged. So that's like the total opposite. You got one extreme is like, no, just stick with the program. And the other one's like, no, the program keeps evolving because new people bring in new, fresh perspective, and we keep adapting and evolving as a business too. And guess which one you're going to want to stick with? Probably the one that keeps evolving versus, well, I guess it depends. Some people really don't like change. So
no, right. But to piggyback on that, Tullio, it's interesting you shared about your organization that those are actually a few of the rehab strategies. So, for example, embracing change, being okay with the unknown, looking for continuous improvements. And to your point, when the fact that you embrace when someone new comes in, we're expecting that there's going to be a change in some way, shape, or form. That is already a rehab strategy in its own way. Like that's a way of saying, hey, we're not going to stifle our growth because we're always open to the fluid environment that we're in, that things are constantly going into different directions because of the different perspectives and experiences and skill sets that individuals can bring to our organization. So you should embrace the unknown and embrace that change and embrace improvement. A couple of tactics in terms of recovery for all of this too is that you could have organizational workshops where you're focused in on, having improvements. How can we innovate? What are some ideas that we can throw into a chart and figure out how we can execute on some of these, having elements like that, and also embracing a culture, as Tullio had mentioned, where your company actually embraces this. Hey, every time a new person comes into the organization, there is going to be a level of change, processes being updated, maybe some innovations that will be introduced. That is very helpful in recovering from some of this toxic trait and saying, hey, no. Every time someone comes with a new perspective, we're not hiring robots, right? We're not hiring people that are going to follow the status quo because we need to keep pushing those boundaries. But outside of that, from a culture's perspective, just being able to create workshops and environments that train people to think in this way, think in terms of improvement. How can you innovate? How can we, present new ideas and keep pushing our departments or organizations forward? Is just one of the few recovery tactics in just breaking that toxic pain.
In the consulting world, one of the biggest segment is change management, because this is probably the most difficult thing for organizations to do, change. And so if you're listening to this and any of this is resonating with you, like, wow, we do that. I don't like change. It's scary. We're not innovating. Our competitors seem to be moving faster than us, but I'm comfortable with the way we're doing things. It's this mindset of don't fix it unless it's broken. Well, there's another mindset that says fix it before it breaks.
Yes.
But to shift into that mindset, sometimes you need to hire some people who can help you through it. They have tools like the AdCard tools and so on that can help you shift into this mindset. So it's not easy to do alone.
Yeah.
for most organizations. Really a tough one for sure.
Yeah.
So, Stephen, let's talk about the next one. This is one of my favorite. Let's measure everything. Measure everything. The metrics that matter. What's the typical symptoms of over measuring things?
Yeah, it's sometimes over measuring, sometimes under measuring. Trying to find those metrics that matter. And you end up a lot of times with irrelevant KPIs. So, what is interesting to us as a digital agency, we're constantly dealing with all kinds of marketing data, and we have, we see different companies all the time coming in doing something a little bit different. And a lot of times, they've got stuff that you're just wondering, how did you get to this point, with this metric? It's like, what's going on here? You've been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and what was the path that led you to be tracking these sort of maybe a vanity metric or something that's just not kind of important to your business? And so you do have to have kind of a little bit of an empathy process that you go through with that, where it's just like, okay, yeah, this is trash metric. No, it's like, okay, wait a minute, there was maybe something behind this to begin with, and you kind of have to dig down into what that might be.
So what's some of the impact of that? Like, what are some of the specific things? Like in our space, you got like some people will just measure whether they're getting social media likes as a measurement, right? Or how many website visits they have. And then it's like, are you monetizing those website visits through ads or something? Are they generating leads? Like, so what is the impact of not measuring the right things?
Yeah. So a lot of times, maybe I always think back in the day when people would come in with, well, we're getting, 100,000 hits on our site. So that's pretty good. And, you're like, okay, stay calm. What does this mean from, a business standpoint here? It's like, oh yeah, we're getting, a whole bunch of likes on our social media, or we're getting traffic from social media. Okay, that's great. What's the business impact here? What's the lifetime customer value? What's the cost per acquisition? What's your customer satisfaction, your retention rates? Let's get to stuff that, has a little bit more meaning to it. Otherwise, what are we going to really optimize towards? So if you've got bad data or poor choice of data, that's going to lead to, impact-wise, to misguided strategies. Basically, you're going to be optimizing toward the wrong thing. You're going to be wasting resources, and you're going to have this very distorted view of your business health. And, it's like, hey, yeah, no, we're getting, 100,000 hits, or we're getting all these likes on our social media. And it's like, okay, so that seems healthy on the surface, maybe, but what does that mean as far as to your business? Where's it taking you?
And you would think that'd be commonsensical. You'd be like, okay, I can't make decisions or the right strategies if I'm just going off incorrect data. But I guess what throws me off is what are the root causes? How does someone get to a place like this where you're not even using rational thought in terms of presenting information to people?
I want to just qualify this for a business that's not a publisher who doesn't make money by monetizing the visitors with ads.
Right.
What's the point of all those metrics?
Right.
Yeah. Like impressions might be the perfect metric for you, but if that's what you're monetizing.
Right.
That's an interesting question, Ash, because I think a lot of times there's first a group that they just don't know what they don't know, right? Yeah. This is all of us, in some form or another. So they just, haven't asked the right questions, didn't know which questions to ask. So there's that. But then there is maybe even a dark side or a toxic side that they don't want to ask the question for a little fear of accountability, or, hey, no, I'm already getting validated in, with these metrics that we've got. And so my job's safe, we're doing well. Look at all these great numbers. So you can go a few different ways with that. So I think, it can be a complex sort of issue to pull apart why this is that way. I typically just assume that they just don't know what they don't know is a lot of times the case. But it could very well be an addiction to these sort of vanity metrics and these surface metrics. And so then what happens when something goes wrong, though, is they don't know the root cause of what went wrong. So if you're really getting into the root cause of a problem on your site, when something goes wrong, now what do I do? Where our sales are down and I'm focusing on these metrics and they're the same. So then this is where you end up really in sort of a toxic situation where someone's looking for a fall guy or someone to blame to cover your butt, right? Because you're just like feeling around in the dark and it's like, okay, something went wrong. I don't know what it is. I'm going to blame this person over here or this agency over here or, this web designer or whatever. And so you're just sort of feeling around in the dark a lot of times with that. And I think that's.
Yeah. And you know what? Empathetically, it's not like we're saying, let's say you're a CMO of a company and you're tracking these metrics. We're not saying, that you shouldn't. The question is, why are you tracking them? And often enough, especially in the B2B space, it's really hard for a CMO to show the progress they're making because they'll be like, well, we're getting leads from sales. That's measurable. It's coming from the sales channel. What are you doing for us? Well, I got all these things that are happening, right? We're getting all these hits and so on. How many of those are turned into leads? Well, it's harder to track when you're also in an organization that has direct sales. So it gets really hard. And sometimes it's not the CMO's fault. It's how they're being judged that creates the problem. Yeah. So, so what's the detox strategy here? How do you recover from this?
Yeah, I think you definitely have to kind of have what I would say is maybe keeping with the theme here with recovery tactics and stuff is sort of establish this sort of metrics detox audit, right? Here's your metrics. What's the best metric we can get? Is it a sale, an actual sale? And what leads to those sales, right? And then so that, we have to have 10 leads for every sale. All right. Okay. So how many do we get 10 leads? We have to have how much traffic for that? How much qualified traffic? How much, there's a whole bunch of questions you can kind of work backwards from. And sometimes, you don't even have the ability to get that sale, and we work with a lot of clients where they don't have that closed loop attribution where we will never know the sale because it went to a third party or something like that. But we want to get as close as we can to that sale as possible. And with our metrics so that we're understanding, hey, if we do 100 of this, we'll get 10 of this and we'll get 1 of these, right? Something like that. And so you can kind of work your way backwards from it. So there's really kind of a process you kind of have to go through, I think. And maybe that involves bringing in different people to the situation because if, you're kind of don't know what you don't know. Maybe that means, hey, let's involve some of our different teams to see what's important. So you can go to, cross-departmental teams to help do this. And I've seen this, and it can get a little sketchy sometimes too, because people get really defensive about things. So depending on your culture here, you have to definitely tread carefully with that cross-departmental things if you're in a bad culture, because I've seen that happen. But in a good culture where people are open to sharing and helping everybody and say, hey, yeah, I'll jump on your team for a little bit and help you here. Where you're all connected, I think that's the healthy way to go forward. If you don't have any of that within your organization, bring in a third party. I mean, there's people that this is what they do for a living and help them detox you, through this process. Help them let you help you. Is that right now I'm saying it? Help me help.
I think some of this too, as we're talking, I had this thought. I think some of this is also still a byproduct of having come out of the Industrial Revolution, where it was all about manufacturing and goods production. So you needed to be judged based on the production of different items. How many screws did you manufacture? How many, whatever, right? So everything was based on what you produced that ultimately created the outcome. So in that fashion, in that model, you need to have measurements across across all these little inputs that ultimately create the output, right? You can't just say, how many cars did you make? It's like all the pieces that come into making that car matter in that model. But as we've evolved from there, now, we're in with the information age and where we are now with a lot more entrepreneurial mindset, the gig economy, et cetera, it's like that mindset still exists. It's like the punch the clock mindset, right? It's like, how many things did you do today? It's like, why does it matter how many things I did today? So like, what does really matter, here? We're talking about what? What do you think is the thing that should be focused on to detox from this?
Yeah, Tullio, I think sometimes too, if you don't know those metrics, all those little details, that's why you introduce like a framework like OKR, right? Is you don't necessarily have to have really specific details on some of that. You just have to have the meaningful outcomes, right? Rather than just these numbers. You've led us on our OKRs. Extol the virtues of these for a moment and just how this works.
Well, the one thing I really appreciate about them is the fact that you can really organize everyone along the same path. And the path is about producing outcomes that generate key results for the business. So, and the way we do it is a very collaborative approach. So instead of having owners, we have champions, multiple champions in some cases, teams that act as leadership team to go and move the goalpost forward towards a meaningful goal that has some specific key results that we've all agreed to matter to us. How we get there and all the little inputs to get there is not as relevant as moving forward. And then being able to collectively talk about, are there any hindering forces this week? Are we in the yellow? Are we in the red? Are we still on the green? You don't talk about all the details. As we've gone through this process quarter over quarter, in our 20-minute check-ins, we don't go into details at all anymore. It's more like, is there anything that's, that anybody needs support with to move forward that's holding you back from achieving the goal for the quarter? So then we can get very laser focused as a team on the things that are meaningful that can make a change, that can make an impact, rather than checking in. These are all the things I did this week. And like, what's the need to do that? It's like punching the clock. I showed up to work today and let me show you what I did. All my work, all the things I did. Talk to me about what outcome you created. And the OKRs are a great way to do that, especially if you've created a model where it's collaborative and there's teams that work together. And the other thing I've noticed is that companies that don't have this framework, they often have different leaders going down the path of different things. And the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And you end up like wasting cycles and energy and resources without really understanding how everybody's working together. So there's always the guess, are they doing enough work? Are they pulling their weight? And all that goes away because it's the entire team working together, CEO and everybody else working together towards the same framework. So to me, I love it because, the proof is in the pudding. I've seen tremendous progress, and I think we've made tremendous progress since we instituted it as well. And it's just wonderful to watch a team work together towards this. Producing meaningful results, not just worrying about metrics. And we've had conversations many times about, should we have some KPIs and things like that? It's like, do we need anything? Is anything falling behind? We're more focused on working collaboratively towards moving the goalpost, and those things are not even come up as an issue. Like often KPIs is just a way to control the effort towards a production. But if you got a team working really well together, you got a good system together, it's like, it becomes a hindering force. Of course, there's certain things you want to measure. You want to make sure you're going down the right path at the right time, but not everything needs to be measured all the time.
What? I know that's going to be a shock to some people, especially like, C-suite or something. This is a total control issue here of understanding everything. Wait, what? So what I like about our OKRs too, and we mentioned kind of that cross-departmental collaboration, is that you can kind of volunteer to do something that's totally out of your area, and you come together with these different really temporary teams, and they're kind of self-managed temporary teams. And so it's this very fluid process that's very effective. And you know, a lot of what we're talking about here is evolutionary processes. And this is kind of an evolutionary process where it's this very flexible sort of thing to get something done, right? And so, you know, in the last segment, I think we were talking about Tullio, you mentioned evolution like several times in one sentence when you're talking about the old systems and practices. And so what you're talking about is really this process of transcending and including what worked, but transcending that and being free and open enough with your processes that you can, you know, be humble enough and open enough to try a new approach and to be flexible enough to accept some new approach. And I think really all of these topics that we talked about today is really that flexibility to, you know, if you're going fast, the flexibility to slow down, the flexibility to move right and left, you know, flexibility to bring something new into the equation. And that's really key to just evolution in general, is this flexible process to get things done. So if
you can't break the addiction of measuring things, here's a good thing to measure. Measure how well your teams are collaborating together. Measure how often members of the team volunteer to contribute to an area of the business that doesn't even belong in what they do. Measure how many things get moved forward voluntarily by team members who just want to contribute value to the organization because they feel compelled to do so, because they want to make an impact. Measure how well people are engaged within the organization, because if those things are happening, everything else takes care of itself. The other stuff, like you said, it's just measures, it's just controls, it's systems in place that I call an immature way of running a business, because I don't know any other way to get people working together. So I'm going to measure them on all these little tactics and all these little doodads, right? So it's old. It doesn't necessarily mean people are collaborating, working together, and have a vision to move the business forward. It's not one person moving the business forward or a group of people on the executive team. It's the entire company. Measure that. That's going to be the best measurement you can achieve if you're really addicted to measuring things. Measure how many people in the organization are moving the goalposts forward voluntarily because they want to, because they believe in that vision and they feel empowered to do it. That's the best measurement you can have in any business.
Yeah, amen. And I think too, if you're in that C-suite or whatever, and you're looking, hey, we got to push this boulder, you know, ahead, and you're doing all these measurement tactics, and you got managers on top of managers on top of managers trying to just push this boulder. It's very inefficient. Versus if it was this sort of voluntary, you know, self-managed group of people who come together because they have an interest in moving this particular boulder forward, you're ending up pushing several at once, much more rapidly through your system. So that's it for today's show. We're going to come back again, continue this talk on business addiction rehab work. We will talk about dependency on traditional hierarchies. This is a good one, you know, the command and control, the dominator hierarchies that can be very toxic. And we're just talking about some of them. The chronic undervaluing of employee well-being is going to be another topic we'll discuss. And we'll jump into the single stakeholder focus in business, usually the investor owner focus. All those two have a similar thread going through them. So if you have a toxic business addiction you want us to cover, please, you know, hey, leave us a review. That helps the algorithm so more people can join in this conversation. But send us a question. We've already got a couple people who have provided us some great ideas on this topic. But that's it for today's episode. Keep trying to build love into your business, and we'll see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.